Welcome to the Palestine Church audio podcast. We hope you enjoy this week's sermon. For more great content and updates from Palestine Church, please visit us at palestinechurch.com.
As the daughter of the house, I can say that our journey to England started when I was really young, and the Lord used this church and so many people in this church to get us to where He was calling us. It takes a village to raise a child. It takes a village to launch a dream. And the Lord used you guys. And the thing that the Lord has been stirring in my heart has been about the shepherd's staff. Now, we lived in Northern Ireland for 5 years before moving to England. And Northern Ireland is as beautiful and green and full of sheep as you have ever seen on a poster. So I know a lot about sheep, but I also know quite a bit, for not being a farmer, a lot about shepherds' staffs. So for instance, did you know that they will not just nudge a sheep if they're going in the wrong direction, but they'll pop it in the ribs to get him to go in the right direction. They'll use the hook of the staff to, if they're about to fall off a cliff, which happens, to snatch them from danger. But they will also use that same hook to draw them close for inspection. If they need anything, to be drawn close to the shepherd. But what they also do is they make notches on the staff, marks, if you will, to remember things God has done, to remember something that might have happened in the field that they need to remember when they go home. But in biblical times, shepherds would have all these radical encounters with God while looking after sheep. And so they would make these marks on their staff. Jacob, angels ascending and descending, mark on the staff. Wrestling with God, hip broken, mark on the staff. Moses, burning bush, voice of God, mark on the staff. You get what I'm saying. David wrestled a lion and won, mark on the staff. All of those things that God did, they remembered by marking on the staff. And my life, our life, would not be where we are without the marks on our staff from this church and from you guys. And so if I had a staff here that was the one I walked around with, you would see it covered in marks of moments where I met God, where God changed my life, goodness of God, faithfulness of God. But some of those marks have names. And I'm just going to mention a few. Like I said, I'm going to try not to cry. Kenny Yakey, where are you? When I was a teenager and we were in that old building, it was an amazing service. The power of God was moving, and it's just like it shifted, and we went from worship, we were about to go to the message. And everybody was sitting down, and Kenny jumps up on the other side of the auditorium and says, "I'm still running, God." And he proceeded to run around the auditorium. And it was as if a wave of the Spirit followed him, because every person who was sitting down, when Kenny passed them, would go, "Oh!" And they fell out. Some jumped up and started shouting for joy. There was no message. It was an obedience to run when God said run. Mark on the staff. Neil Warren. When I was a kid, younger than a teenager, and the Spirit was moving in the 90s in that old building. And I remember seeing my dad up at the front, just weeping and crying. And you, equally as broken, or not broken, weeping and crying under the power of the Spirit, walked over to my dad. And you put your hand on his stomach, and my dad flew back, and you fell with him. And for the next, what felt like hours, you wept and wept under the power of God together. And it's like I saw what it looked like for power to be given from one person to another, and the Lord just ascending right there. Becky May. Where's Becky? Is she in here? Hi, Becky. When we first moved to England from Northern Ireland, it was really hard. We knew this was the land God had called us and had promised us. but the giants were incredibly big. They were massive, and we felt like giving up on a regular basis. And as you all know, those of you who know my parents, we're kind of Christmas crazy. And Christmas was about to be upon us, and the joy was just not there. We were struggling, we were lonely, we had no community in that city where we lived. And I got a message saying that Becky had sent me and my kids and Zach a Christmas Advents calendar. A small thing for her, probably insignificant. She probably doesn't remember it. But it reminded us that relationship extends across the pond and we're not forgotten. Christy. I have quite a few. I could do more. I'm trying to limit it. There are lots of stories with you, but the one that comes to mind was when I called you and I was ready to give up. That happened a lot. But this particular time, you didn't say, Traci, I understand. It's so hard. I'm praying for you. You said, baby, you cannot stay in this place of doubt and anger. You have to deal with this. And you challenged and corrected me. But at the end, you said, but Traci, have you met with him lately? How have you encountered Jesus? And I was like, no. You challenged me. And all of these moments mark in a staff of something God has did and impacted my life. Janet Shaver. I could tell a lot of stories about you, but I'm not. But this one's about your mom in the old building. And we used to sing that song, the greatest thing in all my life is loving you. Well, we were singing that when I was a kid in the old sanctuary. And your mom changed the words to the greatest thing in all my life is serving you. And I remember everybody just started singing it. And then at one point, we shifted back to the greatest thing in all my life is loving you. But your mom, what she did was as she started singing, she started extending her hand to the congregation. The greatest thing in all my life is loving you. And as a kid, I remember thinking, is that what the Father sings to us? Mark and the staff. Michael Yakey. Where's Michael? He's right there. There you are with Peter. When you were a teenager and we were in this building and you and I were doing worship, you gave up being on like the varsity football or soccer team. And I asked you why. And you said, well, because it conflicts with worship practice. And I feel I should be here. What teenager gives up a position on a varsity team because they love to worship Jesus? Mark on the staff. And then mom and dad. Lots of stories, but this one. When I was about 15, I had really started running away, head first, away from God. And through lots of prayer, the Lord brought me back in his faithfulness. But I was clouded by shame, guilt, just at myself. And I felt so unworthy. If you could feel what a heavy blanket feels like, that was shame on me. And there was one Wednesday we were taking communion, and I said I couldn't go up. I was too ashamed. I'd done too much. I can't take the Lord's Supper. And my parents went back to the chair I was sitting in, grabbed me. And as I'm weeping and broken and I'm not worthy, I can't do this, carried me to the table and fed me the Lord's Supper because I couldn't. Notch in the staff, forgiveness, love, the overwhelming love and forgiveness of the Father. Mark in the staff. And I say all that, and I could go on, but all these stories are part of your story too. the marks that I have on my staff that Zach has on his. These are part of your story too. But if we look back to the word in Hebrews 11:21, it says, by faith Jacob, when dying, blessed each of Joseph, sons of Joseph, bowing in worship over the head of his staff. So that means that Israel wasn't just blessing his grandsons in his own authority, which he had every right to do, but he was leaning on the memories of what God had already done. He was drawing from what God had done in his life and not just blessing his grandsons, but pouring out what had been marks on his staff onto his grandchildren. Or with Moses in Exodus 17:11, as long as Moses held up the staff in his hand, the Israelites had the advantage. So when Moses, holding the staff, God parted the Red Sea, mark, provided in the desert, mark in the staff. As he was holding that up, he wasn't just holding it up in his own authority. He was saying, I have the upper hand. You fighting, we have the upper hand. Remember, fight from a place of remembering what God has done. And with all that said, I say thank you, Palestine Church. Thank you, because through every season, we can look back at our proverbial staffs and see what God has done through you guys, which is now impacting a nation that some of you have never been to, some of you might never go to, but that is having an impact in England. And I just want to say thank you.